today. And I'll also tell you that Jenny will be back tomorrow for a sneak peek. Accenture has been a signature research partner with NASCA in the past, and they will be with us again in the current fiscal year. So she'll do a real quick sneak peek tomorrow morning of our research partner and how Accenture is going to be engaging with you. But thank you all so much for the interactive conversation today. The ability to get up and share and hear has been wonderful. So thanks to both of you all for being with us. So let's move on to our next session, which is looking at inclusive workforce policies and practices. And unfortunately, again, as we talked about Mother Nature, she has thrown a wrench into our speakers today. One is due to land, or was due to land about 5 or 6 minutes ago, but we've got our other speakers virtually with us online. Bobby, Katya, and Kristen. But this is the State Exchange on Employment and Disability, and they work with the U.S. Department of Labor, the Office of Disability and Education Programs, and they're a wonderful partner and resource of NASCA. You might remember that we did a national webinar back in June to start the conversation around inclusive policies for people with disabilities. So they're going to share a little bit more today about that. And then ultimately, we're working towards a toolkit for states to really work towards those best practices. We know states have been working on policy, but we're wanting to take it to the next level of doing the implementation. So we're excited to hear from Katya, Bobby, and Kristen. And Katya, we'll turn it over to you to kick us off today.
Great, thank you so much, Pam. And I'm sorry that I wasn't able to join you all in person, a little bit
Katya,
under
if
the
you
weather.
can hear me, you are muted.
Come on.
The catchphrase of 2021.
How about now? Are we good? There we are. Okay, you can hear me because I can hear me, right? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Well, we can't really see. I can't really see him, but again, thank you so much, Pam. And my name is Katya Albanese, and I'm with the State Exchange on Employment and Disability. Sorry that I couldn't join you in person, but as you can tell, I'm a little under the weather, and I'm sure you're all glad that I'm not bringing that to you. I am joined on this panel with my colleague, Bobby Silverstein, who is our Legislative and Policy Counsel for SEED, and Kristen Ballinger, she's from Ohio. She's going to be telling us about some of the policies, practices, and programs that Ohio has put into place to serve as a model employer of people with disabilities. And Kristen's the Deputy Director of Ohio's Division of Employer and Innovation Services. And then throughout the rest of your conference, Pam mentioned our other colleague, Rachel McGreevy, who should be running in at any second, and she'll be there with you all until Friday. Hopefully you'll have a chance to talk with her and share with her and connect with her and learn a little bit more about how we can serve as a resource for you. To tell you a little bit about SEED before I turn things over to Bobby and Kristen to have more of a discussion about some of the policy options and again, what Kristen's doing there in Ohio to give you a good example of an inclusive state government. SEED is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor. Specifically, we work with the Office of Disability Employment Policy, which Pam mentioned. And our goal is to work with states and local governments to implement policies that help remove barriers to employment for people with disabilities and improve employment opportunities for people with disabilities. In case you were not aware, just to pivot for one quick second, it is October, which is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So you may have been seeing some upticks in promotion around disability employment over this last month. And if you do not participate in NDEAM, we strongly encourage you to do so. It's an awesome opportunity to educate around disability employment issues and to really celebrate all the accomplishments and contributions of American workers with disabilities. And this year, the theme is America's Recovery Powered by Inclusion, which is reflective of the Department of Labor's top priorities, which includes disability inclusive COVID response and recovery. And there are lots of different things that you can do to participate in NDEAM. And I just encourage you when you have time to check out dol.gov/NDEAM And if your governor, for example, does not issue a proclamation, wonderful opportunity for you to present that to her or him as an opportunity, again, to show support of inclusiveness in state government and also in private sector employment. So moving along back to SEED and our goal. Our goal for our initiative has always been to promote disability as part of diversity. And I think it's really important for everyone to acknowledge and understand that people with disabilities are a significant part of the population that crosses all races, all ethnicities, genders, and other identity factors. We know that 1 in 5 working age Americans has a disability. We also are now hearing that 1 in 4 who have had COVID is experiencing long COVID related disabilities, things like brain fog and intense fatigue. What you might not know is how low the labor participation rate is for people with disabilities compared to those without. And in most states, you're looking at a 40% differential, meaning that people with disabilities are participating in the labor rate somewhere between 30 and 40%, and people without are upwards of 70 to 80%. Big difference. And that means people that are not participating in the workforce. And we've also heard, of course, from chief administrators and other state representatives about the issues in state government, dealing with everything from employees leaving the workforce and worker shortages to issues around telework and IT infrastructure, as well as mental health and mental health issues and things like compassion fatigue. The speaker before us mentioned state government taking calls from concerned citizens. This is definitely an issue of great importance, and we're hearing a lot about it, about mental health of your state workforce. And so these are all the types of issues where SEED can help support and provide a resource for you to help in developing and implementing policy around those issues. And so one other thing that I did want to mention about SEED, and if you're not all that familiar with disability and disability issues, we are cross disability in focus. And what that means is that we work to improve employment opportunities and outcomes for people with all types of disabilities. So whether you're born with a disability or it's acquired, whether it's physical, developmental, or mental health condition, whether it's visible or invisible. And this also includes our nation's veterans. And as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, many Americans who are acquiring a disability due to COVID. It's really important to note for you to understand that our initiative is not the federal government telling states what to do, but rather providing an avenue for states to request information to support their policy goals around the employment of people with disabilities. It's a free resource for you, and we work to customize how we are actually working with each state. So one of the things that we find so interesting when people ask, how do you support each state? It really depends on what each state's needs. Each constituency is unique, to the state. And so that's how we work with each state. But we do have lots of resources available. And as Pam mentioned, we're working with NASCA to develop a toolkit specifically for chief administrators. But real quickly, before I turn it over to Bobby, some of the resources that we have that you can access now includes Work Matters, which is a policy framework. This is really the foundation of our of our initiative and our policy options and best practices and examples. It's the culmination of a national task force and includes 5 themes, really 5 themes of around disability employment, and over 240 examples from states and 13 strategies for policy options for states to implement in supporting an inclusive policy. And the first of those themes is laying the groundwork, which includes state as model employer. And Bobby's going to talk all about that in just a few minutes. And in addition to the framework, we have a simplified checklist, which is really a guidepost for state and local governments. It's a cheat sheet of sorts. So if you don't want to go through 90 pages of a policy framework, it just allows you to, as you're developing policies, ensure that you are checking what is meaningful and and inclusive for people with disabilities. And so with that, I think I will turn it over to Bobby, and Bobby may jump into some other or highlight a few other of our resources, but I don't want to take up too much time. So Bobby, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Katya. Again, my name is Bobby Silverstein. I am the Policy and Legislative Counsel for SEED. In a former life, I was for 10 years the staff director and chief counsel to the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Disability Policy, where we worked on the Americans with Disabilities Act and 20 other pieces of disability-related legislation. I also was the former director of a disability policy center. As Katya said, we are a resource. We are not advocates. We can tell you what your colleagues around the country are doing on any topic basically related to disability employment policy. And today, excuse me, today I am going to be focusing on state as a model employer and what we've learned from your colleagues around the country. I don't know about you, when I start a new topic, I like to find out what others are doing and then steal and borrow. I don't like to reinvent the wheel. I don't like to start from scratch. And so what we done is state will call us in and say, hey, we're interested in learning what others are doing about state as a model employer. Could you share what we've been doing and then share some ideas? So we'll do a gap analysis. Some folks have said, could you draft a regulation for us? Sure. We are here to provide as Katya said, a free resource. And in addition, we have a series of frameworks on COVID-19. And I just want to mention that before I jump into the topic. States are taking a lead with folks returning to the workplace now. There are health and safety plans that folks are developing. How do you make sure they're disability inclusive? That is, they address health and safety issues that we know from CDC and OSHA, but at the same time are aligned with our disability civil rights statutes. So we have a framework on health and safety. We have a framework on telework, a framework on vaccinations, on mental health issues and workforce readiness. So again, you can see what your colleagues around the country are doing. In terms of state as a model employer, again, before I jump into the state examples, I just want to share with you that the federal government has two very critical policy pronouncements that, again, you can look at, borrow and steal to the extent it's consistent with your culture in your state. One is recently by the president, Executive Order 14035, which deals with, in the federal sector, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, to send the message that disability is part of diversity and inclusion. Secondly, there's a regulation called Section 501 of the Rehabilitation Act, which has an extensive framework on making, in this case, the federal government a model employer. So if you want to look at some other federal documents, those are two that I urge you to look at. In terms of state as a model employer, this is some of the things that we learned from looking across states. There are a number of states that have developed formal mechanisms or infrastructures. That is by statute. And Kristen will give you an example of how that's done by statute, so that the leadership is in the form of somebody, maybe as in Maryland, where there's a Department of Disability. So they're in part of the cabinet at the table. There are task forces, sometimes long-term, sometimes short-term, time limited, to look explicitly at this issue. There's legislation creating these task forces, as well as executive orders, so that there is an entity that is looking at this, not just for half an hour, but studying the issue and then making recommendations. Some states have developed strategic plans for making the state a model employer for people with disabilities. And those state plans include goals, benchmarks, workforce analyses, action plans of adoption of best promising and emerging practices, and progress reports and meeting with the governor to look at how things are progressing. Another strategy used by states is what I refer to as fast-track hiring authorities. There are many people with disabilities, if they go through the typical civil service process, they probably won't be hired, but they are otherwise qualified. And a number of states have developed these policies where folks get an opportunity to be interviewed. They're determined qualified. They are probationary employees. And then if they work well, they are converted to regular career service status. In some cases, they just waive or modify certain of the civil service provisions. In other cases, when there's testing, there will certainly be accommodations. Another strategy developed by states is what we call centralized accommodation program. You all know folks with disabilities are entitled to reasonable accommodation absent undue hardship. Well, let's just take an example where an individual with a significant disability needs extensive, expensive assistive technology. If the hiring manager has to pay out of that budget, and there's a second person who's qualified with no need for accommodations, there's a pressure to say, well, that's coming out of my budget. Maybe I'll hire the other person. Well, a number of states and private sector employers have adopted this centralized accommodation fund, where it's either at the agency level or the state as a whole. A couple of states have done it at state as a whole. And so you're taking away the cost issue from the decision as to who to hire. States have developed, particularly because of COVID, disability inclusive telework policies. A typical telework policy will probably start with the sentences, telework is at the sole discretion of the supervisor or manager. Well, that's not exactly true, because telework is a form of accommodation. So a disability inclusive telework policy would recognize that in certain cases, it's not at the sole discretion of the manager, supervisor, if the employee requires telework as an accommodation. Another issue that some states have adopted is what we call personal assistance services. Some folks with very significant disabilities will need somebody to help in toileting, in eating, and clothing. And the federal government and a couple of states have adopted policies to pay for and allow those folks to work because of the existence of PAS. And the last category that I want to just highlight is training. There's a number of states that have required mandatory training on disability inclusion, disability etiquette, and disability awareness. So I just kind of gave you the Cliff Notes version of state as a model employer. And if some of those things are of interest to you during the Q&A, we can chat further, but also know that the resource exists in terms of the Work Matters report, and also know that we update that report every month. So we can tell you as of actually the middle of October what every state, most states are doing with respect to any of these issues. Kristen, I'm going to send it over to you. So let's go from the big picture to a specific state and how you have developed your disability inclusive policies and practices.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Ohio. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. As Katia mentioned, it is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So happy NDEAM, as we say here. We have a couple of policy examples that I'll share with you that honor National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So Katia mentioned maybe a governor signing a proclamation. In Ohio, our governor, Mike DeWine, did sign a proclamation on October 1st, recognizing National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Another way that we are celebrating the month is in our most recent budget bill, which was passed in July at the start of our state fiscal year in House Bill 110. We had some language that the governor is now recognizing an Ohio employer with the Governor's Inclusive Employer Award every October in recognition of National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And so this is now part of our administrative law in Ohio, that the governor will make this recommendation. And so we just awarded that to the Cleveland Clinic a few weeks ago. So just a couple of tangible examples of how we recognize NDEAM in Ohio. So my name is Kristen Ballinger. I am the Deputy Director of Employer and Innovation Services at Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, or OOD. Everything in state government has an acronym, as you all know. So OOD is the State of Ohio Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. So we are the agency that is tasked with supporting individuals with disabilities to prepare for, obtain, and retain competitive integrated employment. So we work with about 30,000 Ohioans with disabilities every year. We serve those job seekers, candidates that are looking for employment to either get the training that they need, the services that they need, the reasonable accommodations, or maybe assistive technology that they may need, the college or university training, et cetera, in order to help them obtain employment in the community that is at competitive wages. In Ohio, we serve a large percentage of students with disabilities, and we are also serving a number of college students at public colleges and universities in Ohio, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a few moments. So as far as state as a model employer, in January of 2019, Governor Mike DeWine was sworn into office, and just a few moments after he took the oath of office, he signed an executive order. It's 2019-03D, so it was technically the third one signed in 2019. And that executive order established Ohio as a disability inclusion state and a model employer of individuals with disabilities. As a result of signing that executive order, we got to work on the implementation of the different directives that were included within that executive order. So one of the things that was included in the executive order is that it established the position of a statewide ADA coordinator. So a staff person hired, brand new position, that would provide support and technical assistance to all of the state agencies in the cabinet or executive level state of Ohio to make sure that those agencies had the support they needed to increase hiring of individuals with disabilities, to provide supports for those individuals with disabilities, to understand policies related to reasonable accommodations, those types of things that Bobby was just talking about. Our statewide ADA coordinator is housed at the Ohio Department of Administrative Services, which I believe is the agency that the member of NASCA, Director Kathleen Madden is the director of that state agency. And so that's where our statewide ADA coordinator is employed. That executive order also required that all executive branch state government employees participate in regular disability etiquette and awareness training. So our agency, OOD, worked with the Department of Administrative Services to develop an online web-based training for those state of Ohio employees. And we have over 50,000 state of Ohio employees that have all participated in disability etiquette and awareness training. We didn't want it to be like your kind of typical required training. We really wanted it to be interactive, and we wanted it to be memorable. We wanted the participants that were doing the training to really come away from that training with some really good information about disability etiquette and disability awareness, and some practical examples of how they could use what they had learned. So we interviewed about 15 individuals with disabilities. About half of them were state of Ohio employees. The other half were just private citizens. And we asked them to tell us in their own words, best practices for respectful interactions, appropriate language, overcoming myths or fears that you may have about interacting with individuals with disabilities. And we received a lot of really great feedback from folks that took that training and said that they learned something that maybe they didn't know before. And it also helped them just feel more comfortable in interacting with people with disabilities, you know, understanding that, you know, before you walk up to somebody and start pushing them in a wheelchair, you should ask first. Like those kind of practical examples that were part of that content that we shared. So that's just another tangible example of a directive that was in the executive order that we then implemented. Another program that I want to share a little bit more information about was a way that we saw a best practice to help promote hiring of individuals with disabilities, increase opportunities, and increase exposure for individuals with disabilities into state government employment. And so in the fall of 2019, Ohio launched the Ohio Vocational Apprentice Program. Through that program, our agency, Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, partners with all of the state cabinet level agencies to really identify what their hiring needs are, the types of positions that are frequently posted, that you have a high demand for, so that we could learn what those positions were and what the qualifications were for those positions, what the state agencies were looking for in terms of an ideal candidate. We then took those positions back and worked with our counselors. And again, we work with about 30,000 Ohioans throughout the year. That's how many we serve who would be looking for employment. And we identified candidates who met the qualifications or would meet the qualifications with maybe some experience, and that would be a good fit for state government employment. So through this program, the Vocational Apprentice Program, OOD, our agency, will place a vocational apprentice with the state agency. So the state agency is actually the employer of record and hires that person as an intermittent. And then our agency funds the wages for that apprentice up to $15 an hour, 25 hours a week, for a maximum of 1,000 hours. That then gives that individual that experience and that exposure to state government. It also helps the agency. Maybe they haven't hired a lot of individuals with disabilities before, helps that exposure as well. The ultimate goal of the Vocational Apprentice Program is permanent employment. So we work with those agencies as that apprentice is working towards that 1,000-hour threshold to make sure that they are well prepared. If there is a position that will come available at that agency, that person will be hired or will go through the hiring process just like any other candidate. So that candidate would interview in a competitive setting, other folks, either internal or external. We are a bargaining unit state. would also potentially be interviewing for that position. And so we want to make sure that we're preparing that candidate as much as we can. But again, they are competing for that position. So far, since we've started the program in October of 2019, we have placed 23 apprentices at 17 state agencies in really just a variety of positions. We have individuals that are working in human resources, information technology. So some folks are working on the help desk. We have a lot of candidates that are in finance. So they may be working as a budget analyst. One of our first vocational apprentices was working at one of our state agencies as a graphic designer. And then she was actually hired on permanently by that agency at the conclusion of her vocational apprenticeship. So far, 9 apprentices that have completed the program have been hired into permanent employment with state agencies. Out of those 9, 1 of those actually was hired by one of our county agencies, so 8 actually in state government, 1 in county government. Average starting wage of over $20 an hour. And those positions are things like capital finance analyst, information technologist, customer service assistant, person in the mailroom, a food service worker, office professionals. So we're really just pleased that the program has been so successful in both getting candidates that experience that they need and then also reaching that ultimate goal of permanent employment. So the way that this kind of started, we met. I actually attended a cabinet meeting and so got to introduce the program to all of the state agency directors. And then our business relations specialist, who's part of my team, started working with the recruitment staff at those state agencies. So working with the direct human resources professionals to learn more about those positions. We then identified the candidates, scheduled the interviews, and this is ongoing. In fact, we have 2 candidates that are just getting ready to start at another one of our state agencies in a fiscal position first week of November. So we continue on and looking for other opportunities so that we can get those folks into those opportunities, and then also support our state agencies who have those workforce needs. So they're able, it's kind of a win-win partnership for both our participants and for the state agency who's getting that qualified worker as well. So I think I'll kind of stop there. I think Bobby may have a few other points or maybe some questions, and then we'll open it up.
Yeah, two quick issues, Kristen, for clarification. You mentioned the cabinet being there. What is the statutory structure there for the interplay between the VR director and the cabinet?
Yes, so our agency director, Kevin Miller, is a member of the governor's cabinet. He is appointed by governor. So he was appointed by Governor DeWine when he took office in January 2019.
And just there's another state in particular, Maryland, as I said, that has a Department of Disability. And so that person also sits at the cabinet positions. And in terms of as a disability inclusive culture in a state, there's probably no 2 better states than Ohio and Maryland to reflect the potential of having what we refer to as universal design, which is to make sure that any policy, practice, procedure, project, initiative is looking and taking into consideration the needs of the greatest number of folks with different functional strengths and limitations at the initial design stages. So you're not retrofitting a building, or you're not retrofitting, in this case, a practice. And universal design is something that is front and center stage in Ohio. And the other thing is, my understanding from the executive order is that states are required to collect and evaluate self-disclosed data. Could you go into that a little bit more detail and what that data is used for?
Yeah, so the states or the agencies then look at the data for individuals with disabilities that are employees of the agency that have maybe sought a reasonable accommodation. There is a way within our human resources tracking system, and our director of human resources could probably answer this question better than me, but there is a way that they can track if an individual self-discloses that they have a disability. And so I think in previous years prior to the executive order, it just wasn't something that was paid attention to. It was always kind of there, but nobody really was tracking it or looking at it. And so that's actually a responsibility of the statewide ADA coordinator to start to help those agencies through that reasonable accommodation process, understanding what those policies look like so that they are implemented consistently, so that we understand what reasonable accommodations a person may need in order to be able to perform the essential functions of the job, and then making sure that those are procured for them, whatever that may be. Oftentimes reasonable accommodations don't cost anything at all. Sometimes they are just maybe a policy change. So for instance, if a person is blind and uses a service animal for mobility, maybe amending a policy that employee is able to have an animal at work. It could be a policy around a flexible schedule. If that person maybe is receiving mental health treatment and needs to have treatment appointments during the normal workday, maybe there's a flexible schedule that's put in place for that person. So most reasonable accommodations don't cost anything at all. And those reasonable accommodations that do have a cost, typically that one-time cost is $500 or less. So just helping agencies kind of understand that. Within our agency, in my division, we have a worksite accessibility specialist on our board or on our team. I didn't go into a lot of detail about what I do, but basically we are our agency's connection to the business community. So we work with employers all over Ohio to promote hiring and facilitate those connections with our job seekers. And on our staff, we have a registered licensed occupational therapist. She's also a certified ADA coordinator, and she can work with those employers to help them understand the ADA, Title I of the ADA, their requirements as an employer. The nice thing about it is she's not a compliance arm. She's technical assistance. So she's not going in to write citations. She's going in to look at their process, look at their environment, and make recommendations so that they can improve. So she's able to kind of go in there without that, that fear that they may have that if she wasn't a compliance arm. So, and we often provide that training to our state agency partners. We work very closely with James Clinkscale. He's our statewide ADA coordinator. In fact, tomorrow we're doing a presentation with him for our Department of Public Safety on disability etiquette and awareness, reasonable accommodations, and implicit bias training. So in celebration of Indy.
Cool. And again, my last comment, and then we'll open it up to questions, is it's interesting that if you look currently, there are a number of states who are developing strategic plans and using workforce analysis like has been done historically for race, ethnicity, and gender, and doing that for disability. And that's being done at the federal level, because 10 years ago, if you said, could you do that? People would say, no, we don't have the ability to have that kind of data. But a lot of folks are doing that now, including the federal government. So anyway, let's open it up to some questions, and then I'm going to let Kristen close us up with any takeaways or any insights that she would like to share with folks.
And others, questions in the room? Anyone have a question or a comment you'd like to share from your own state? Well, team, I think you all have wowed them to the point that they've just needing some time to grasp all the information and digest it. So, Kristen, we will let you wrap us up and end the session a little bit this afternoon. So, thank you.
All right. Well, would welcome anybody if you do have questions, would like more specific information about how Ohio has implemented state as a model employer, please reach out. Our website is ood.ohio.gov. My contact information can easily be found there. Just to kind of close us out, this has been established as a priority by our governor. That was made clear when he signed the executive order, within just a few moments of being signed into or sworn into office. And really then after that executive order is signed, it's all about the implementation. And so we stayed true to the directives and the mission of what the executive order said, and really tried to develop some tangible strategies that we could implement to affect change and to move the needle and really see the progress of increasing employment of individuals with disabilities in state government. So thanks so much for your time this afternoon, and look forward to responding to any of you if you have questions.
For coming and being with us here today. We're going to take a break. There's a break set up across the outside foyer here. Please help yourself to some snacks. We'll be back here in 15 minutes. We've got another session or two, and then off to our reception for the afternoon. So we'll see you in 15 minutes.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.